There's a scene in the movie Castaway where our main character has an ice skate in his hand. And if you've seen the movie, you know exactly where I'm going with this. There's a medical procedure for his like a dental procedure that he needed to do before he got stuck on this abandoned island where the tooth was basically growing in kind of at an odd angle and needed to be removed. So our main character, I forget the guy's name actually in the movie, but he has to take this ice skate and a rock and do surgery on himself. Pretty brutal scene, but it does raise the question, what on earth did we do prior to modern medicine, especially in the field of orthodontics and dentistry? And you might think like, well, maybe everybody sort of lived in, imagine the stereotypical British medieval person with teeth just going all over the place. And was that normal for human development, or has something changed? Well, there's a guy by the name of Dr. Weston Price who, in the early 20th century, did this kind of comprehensive research study on how it was that sort of more native, if you will, or less civilized people lived their lives. And this was a time prior to really widespread industrialization and globalization that we see today. And what was really interesting about his findings was that regardless of where he went, some of the commonalities between all of these peoples were a very broad facial structure. And none of them really seemed to have cavities. None of them seemed to have a need for, putting ice skates into their mouths and removing themselves of a tooth. No one had to have their wisdom teeth taken out like I did. And so what exactly was the difference? And there could be several factors that industrialization does to the growth of the face, but we're not going to get too much into why it is some people need, braces and others don't. But the question sort of arises more broadly. What is it that we have that are common factors in our 21st century living, where we take for granted the type of help that we need now maybe wasn't the type of help that was necessarily needed back then? Orthodontics and dentistry being two primary examples of that. And so, well, part of you can imagine that somebody who only ate farm to table, as it were, or only hunted and only had meats and vegetables and fruits probably didn't have as many problems with cavitation, for example. Whereas grain-based societies that seem to go along with that particular issue. So there seems to be something there related to nutrition. Now, again, this isn't primarily the subject of today's conversation. However, this is kind of a way of thinking about why it is that we might need something to help with basically the way that our jaws are positioned. And specifically, another question that we could ask beyond dentistry and orthodontic care that we might need is, how has this affected our breathing? And so we can see pretty definitively that the skull shape and the makeup of the modern person's facial features is not exactly the same as before. I would wager that the rates of something like sleep apnea, where, if you're not familiar with that condition, essentially describes a state where someone tends to like choke on their tongue almost, or they basically have trouble when they're sleeping to be able to breathe. And so with the subject today, we have Dr. Mowak from Airwaav to discuss with us this really interesting piece of technology that on first blush, you might think like, why do I need help breathing? That seems like the most basic human function. But then a similar question could be asked, why does a dog like a French bulldog need help breathing? Well, his genetics and his sort of environment, if you will, was not quite the same as it was before. Now, I'm not calling everyone who's listening here a bulldog with a facial structure that is so remote from the way that it used to be, but the idea is that there's been some level of genetic drift. Now, Dr. Bob is going to get a little bit more into the details here and why it is that we might want some type of a device to help with our breathing. But with all of that said, I want to introduce him to the floor. And can you give us a little bit of insight into any of those kind of ideas and why it is we might need in this day and age a mouthpiece to help us breathe?
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Bob Mohawk. I wish I was a doctor. I only play one on TV, or the old Holiday Inn Express commercial.
Yeah, I'm sure you're on Grey's Anatomy or something at some point, right?
Yeah, exactly. But you're absolutely right. I think there's a ton of, if you actually look at the anatomical differences between jaws, ethnicities, and parts of the world where you grew up, it has a huge impact, and it has a disproportionate impact on performance and breathing, as you said. And in fact, I think the genesis of this product is actually born out of centuries old understanding of the physiological change that happens from clenching the jaw. I'm sure everyone's familiar with the expression bite the bullet, right? That was actually born out of the Civil War when a soldier was going to have surgery or have a leg amputated and they didn't have any kind of a pain relief. Bullets used to be round and malleable back in the Civil War, so they'd bite on it to endure pain. And I think that's actually a great segue into talking a little bit more about Airwaav and showing it, if that's a good time to jump into the presentation, Marcus.
Yeah, let's do it. So there's a lot of really, as I'm going to give permission over to him to do that. But with this particular device, it seems to me that it does a lot with a little. And we're going to talk about all of the various benefits. It's not merely the way it kind of adjusts the jaw shape, but a lot of things downstream to that. Yeah, the biting the bullet thing is pretty interesting. So we're going to, for those listening in afterward, you can find a video recording of this on the Odyssey Project section in our Institute. And so here we go.
Yeah, perfect. And I think, even dating further back, there's been a lot of studies and research to show that they would find Viking and Roman skulls biting on leather straps in battles, or Native American women would bite on sticks giving birth. This concept of enhancing performance. And that really, again, it's centuries old. This is actually not centuries old photo of the fastest man in the world. The Jamaican running teams are taught very specific techniques about how to manage their jaw or how to bite. And what at Airwaav, what we feel like is we've taken, research that started in the 1970s with a dentist, an NFL team dentist, where they found that just wearing a traditional mouth guard could increase strength parameters or endurance parameters in breathing. And what we've done with almost 25 years with our team's research and science is really perfected it. And I'll talk about the mouthpiece specifically and then the benefits. And we refer to it as fuel injection for your lungs and muscles. So for anybody who's ever worn a protective athletic mouth guard for football or soccer or lacrosse or whatever, Airwaav does not fit on the upper teeth. It fits on the lower teeth. And we specifically call it a mouthpiece. It is not protective. It's not designed to protect your teeth from impact. And the way that it works is this intake bar that fits on your lower teeth, and that bar is right in front of your teeth. And really what we're trying to teach people how to do is to use your tongue as a muscle. It's the genioglossus muscle, and it's the largest obstruction in your airway. So when you're biting on the mouthpiece and you put your tongue down and forward under that bar, it actually opens your airway significantly. We'll say up to 25%. The average is actually an 8% increase the diameter of the airway. This is a CAT scan. You can see the nasal passage. There's the mouth. And this specific subject actually had a fairly significant increase in the airway with the mouthpiece in on this side. And this is a photo of a skull from the top down, and it's an average of a 9% increase in the width of the airway. And we like to think of the airway like a hose or plumbing, right? If you have, bigger pipes in your house, you have more water pressure and more water goes through it. If your airway is larger, more oxygen is going to go through it. And so that's one aspect of the product and some of the specific benefits into breathing. I'll talk about them more. The other thing that happens is really related to that bite the bullet concept, that if you think about what your jaw does in response to any stress, physical, psychological, or emotion, our body's natural instinct, the fight or flight response, is to clench our teeth. And it actually triggers a cascade of hormones, adrenaline and cortisol, and there's a physiological change. There's another term, a technical term called potentiation activation, which means it accelerates neuromuscular response. So if an athletic trainer or a physical therapist were on the phone or on this call, they might describe it like this, that when you go to lift weights or throw a ball or hit a ball, your brain is sending lots of signals to your muscles to activate and all the fibers to activate. And when that process is sped up, more things happen in the body. Again, that physiological change, like biting the bullet. It leads to benefits like an increase in strength, whether that's grip strength, muscular endurance, increased bench press reps. Some of the world's fittest and strongest people, Tom Stolman, the world's strongest man, Mitchell Hooper, the second world's strongest man, previous winner, Jesus Oliveira set the all-time world record powerlifting record wearing Airwaav. James Sprague is the fittest man in the world. He won the CrossFit Games. The first two finishers wear Airwaav. It has a bunch of other physiological benefits too. This was actually a study that was done completely independent of us at Florida Southern College with collegiate baseball and softball players, showing that if you clench down, your bat swing speed would increase. If you clench down on Airwaav, it would actually increase even more, up to 5.8%. Again, there's that bite the bullet physiological effect. And so we have lots of professional baseball players and Olympic softball players using the product. To the breathing part specifically, where Marcus started this, it actually, that you can imagine, as your airway is getting larger, it actually helps reduce your respiratory rate up to 20%, and then the production of 20%, up to 20% reduction in the production of lactic acid. So think of that, if you were running on a treadmill and you were 100 breaths a minute, which, I'm bad at math, that's an easy number. So if you had 100 breaths a minute and you put the Airwaav mouthpiece in and you clenched on it and put your tongue under that bar, you would immediately drop to 80 breaths a minute without changing the performance level. So basically your body is having to work less strenuously to accomplish the same output. The other thing that happens, and it's a kind of a combination of the oxygen and the physiological change, is that it actually reduces the production of cortisol by up to 51% during intense workouts. And cortisol obviously has a lot of implications. In fact, the military has studied cortisol very specifically in its relationship to military performance. And cortisol levels accounted for 22% of the symptoms of disassociation and 31% of the variance during stress. And so it has huge implications. And again, all our research has been done on our human testing has been done at the Citadel on healthy cadets. And we've got 15 years of peer-reviewed published research to support that. I'll tell you a little bit about the products. We have two primary versions of the products that, are designed for use in sports. The PX1 is what we would describe as an entry-level product. It's relaxed fitting, easy to pop on and off your teeth. And the PX2, which is designed for more endurance athletes and endurance sports. And the difference is it has these T-bars for enhanced, a tighter fit and more fitting material, so that if you like to run or cycle, cyclists and runners tend to relax their jaw. And so if you're not clenching, you can still put your tongue down and forward under that bar without the appliance popping off your lower teeth. And then the product that I know many of the participants in the Mission 22 program received is our Airwaav recovery product designed to improve sleep. So if you remember, what we are trying to do to teach, all of you and anybody using this appliance is how to use your tongue as a muscle to best accomplish to open your airway and get the benefits. But like any muscle, we don't get to control it at night. So, but we know the tongue, just like when you're, conscious, it's the largest obstruction in your airway. When Marcus talked about apnea, snoring is a symptom of sleep apnea, and snoring is caused by the tongue falling into the back of your throat and, vibrating when you're breathing. And we don't make sleep apnea or snoring claims with this device. But we are still trying to help individuals get the tongue out of the back of your throat when you sleep, just so that if you get more oxygen, you're going to wake up feeling more refreshed. And so there's some technology we built into this product. If you think about, what does your tongue do if you get a little popcorn kernel stuck in your teeth? If you're like me, your tongue will always go, touch that popcorn kernel and push at it till it's freed up. So we introduced these little bumps under that intake bar to trick your tongue into thinking it's a popcorn kernel. And then there's a lot of research that shows when you touch the sides of the tongue, it actually has a reflex like your knee. If you've been to the doctor and hits your knee and your foot goes forward, your tongue will lurch forward when you touch the sides of it. And so that technology is designed to do that. Here's an example. One of our athletes, he's a Division I pitcher at Abilene Christian. He actually increased his throwing velocity by 3 to 4 miles an hour just by putting the mouthpiece in. He didn't have to change how he throws or his motion. It put it in, but for sleep and that recovery product and breathing, he had actually been using a Whoop device to measure a lot of his performance metrics, but sleep in particular. And so he had been tracking it in this recovery index within the Whoop app for 14 months. And these were 3 days before he started wearing Airwaav. And then afterwards, it had a huge transformation on his recovery score. And it's a product, it's designed for sleep, but we do have athletes. So if this is a product you have, you can actually wear it in performance. So Tanner Scott, who's an all-star pitcher for the Dodgers, actually the recovery product is his favorite version, and he wears that when he's throwing. But I think the way to think about this appliance and how it can help you in your daily life, I'll give you 2 quotes from Dan Perlmutter, who is a director of sports performance and a performance coach at Duke. And he actually talks about how Airwaav allows athletes to control their breathing, to control their heart rate, and be calm and present in the moment, to be less stressed. And his point of view for any individual is, if you can actually get a 1% better night's sleep, and whether you're talking about an athlete or an individual, you are going to be better physically, psychologically, and emotionally. And so that becomes a really, compelling part of why we talk about this product, why we thought it would be really valuable to partner with Mission 22 to help all of the participants and members. If we can improve the workouts or exercise you're doing, or to improve, your sleep, and just make people better the next day. That's what we get excited about as a company and as a brand. And if you decide to use it, you'll be in good company with the 2 world's strongest men and the fittest men on earth, and lots of the fittest men and women. Rich Froning, the 4-time, he's the Tiger Woods of CrossFit, Paige and Abby, and on and on and on. Lots of great athletes that use our product both for performance benefits and for sleep. And then we recently launched Airwaav nasal strips. Again, our mouthpiece addresses the airway opening and makes your airway bigger. Well, if you're a big nose breather, and there's a lot of people who believe nasal breathing is important, we wanted to address that part of the anatomy and plumbing as well. And so we've got those products, and this is a Mission 22 exclusive code on airwaav.com for anybody in the Mission 22 family. Use code Mission 22 for 40% off site wide. That is good through this Friday. And with that, I will pause and see if there's any questions.
Well, my main question is, why didn't you have a picture of me up there out on my run as an example of the athletes lots of really interesting information there. Several things I want to kind of cue in on. At my CrossFit gym, I coach there every once in a while part-time. And when I'm coaching somebody on a new movement, especially with barbell movements, so shoulder press would be a good example, right? Where you just have the barbell at your shoulder, your front rack, and then you press overhead. And what I explain to new athletes is like, imagine you had my favorite analogy is the cannon on the canoe. And so if you had a cannon on a canoe, how stable is that thing going to be when you fire it off? And right away you get the picture of like, okay, yeah, it's rocking all over the place. Like, you need to make your body not like the canoe, but like the solid ground. And so how do we do that? And so for a press overhead, the idea is before you do anything, you got to brace. We talk about bracing all of the time. And so it's kind of a clinch. Like clinch, you have to be careful about when you use that word, because you can definitely like overdo that. But the whole point is that when you create the sort of solid ground of your body, then you have the power to move that thing overhead. And the same thing is true with bench press. So you might think like, why do I need to plant my feet solidly into the ground for a bench press if basically the bench is taking up the whole thing? And the answer is that when the body has that kind of cue of everything right now is tight and ready to move a thing in one direction, then it's more able to do that. And so with the baseball throw situation, it kind of sounds to me like the mouthpiece in and of itself is kind of where you're beginning that movement to create the solid ground out of the rest of your body. Is that on track, or what are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's definitely, you're spot on with the overhead lift. In fact, Mitchell Hooper, who, won the World's Strongest Man 2 years ago, has won really every event since the World's Strongest Man last year, actually really articulated the benefits the same way you did. That they do the big overhead log presses, and he had balance and stability issues, and noticed an immediate difference as soon as he started wearing Airwaav. And that the question as it relates to baseball, I have to believe there's some similarity to that. That's the way you described it in a lifting environment, isn't the way that the professional or elite level baseball players describe it, but I'm sure that is certainly with the swing velocity more than pitching, where you are kind of stable and getting locked into a position to swing. So,
Mhm.
and honestly, there's a lot of again, there's been so much research. If you were going to try to explain the physiological mechanism, there's aspects, there's benefit. We see benefits in range of motion and flexibility that, in all candor, I don't know that we really understand how it's happening. It's
Mhm.
kind of like, if you went out into the parking lot and tried to lift a car, you probably couldn't. But if your kid was trapped under it, you might be able to go out there and lift it up, right? There's physiological things that happen in the body that we don't understand. We know there's a benefit. We know there's a correlation, but we can't specifically say this is what happened.
Yeah. Yeah. The image of angels in the outfield comes to mind. Um,
Yes.
Another question I had, you mentioned before that using the mouth, the recovery piece specifically showed a pretty significant decrease in one's level of cortisol production. I'm trying to think through what the mechanism of action for that might be, and my initial thought is how there is one thing and one thing only that is universally responsible for triggering a fear response, i.e., stimulating the amygdala. And they've even proven that this thing also stimulates the amygdala in people who are straight sociopaths. So in other words, they really have a very flat affect. Whatever brain chemistry or structure that prevents them from really being able to embody emotions is just not there, with one exception, which is kind of wild. And that exception is asphyxiation. And so when the body starts to perceive that it's running low on oxygen, then there's a fear and panic attack very reliably. And so putting someone, for example, I forget the exact use of this, but if you put them in an environment with lots of CO2, you can reliably stimulate a stress response for obvious reasons. Get me out of here. I need to get to oxygen right away. And so I'm wondering if just by putting the mouthpiece in and creating more bandwidth for that air to get in, that in and of itself is starting to communicate to the body, hey, there's more oxygen available simply by adding volume of oxygen to the lungs by way of open, like you said, it reduces the amount of number of breaths. So like diaphragm contractions go down to get the same amount of air as before. So that's sort of my thought of how that sort of mechanism can work. Can you speak a little bit more to that?
Yeah, I think it's a really fascinating topic. And we've had a number of dentists reach out that love to recommend and prescribe Airwaav products to their patients. Some of them have actually stated that they believe and that there's research to suggest that grinding your teeth at night is actually a reaction to a deprivation of oxygen. Like you said,
Interesting.
that the body has responded to it. And I've only heard that recently in the last couple of years. I think, so I think there is something there. The other thing that, what actually led us to study cortisol, in 2007, there was a study done in Japan on rats. And forgive me for describing the study, but they basically taped rats on their backs, a bunch of rats on their backs to stress them out. And they let half of them bite on sticks, and they sacrificed them all. And when they measured cortisol levels, the rats biting on sticks had 50% less.
Hmm.
So that study actually led us to do studying cortisol requires blood work and saliva. It's a much more comprehensive study. And that's when we actually did the first wave of research shortly after that in like 2008 or 2009. And we were able to replicate that during, and the stress, it was exercise induced stress, so strenuous workouts. But with the mouthpiece, saw that similar correlation, a 50% reduction in cortisol.
Hmm. Yeah, really interesting. And so is it more right now it's just clenching is associated with that, or have we been able to really identify the mechanism there?
Well, there's an association. I don't think we fully understand it. If Dr. Garner were on this podcast, she has led all the research at the Citadel. There's a significant relationship with the trigeminal nerve and clenching and blood flow and brain activity that, as I said, I'm not a doctor. I know there's a correlation. I don't think we fully understand and know why it's happening.
Hmm. Yeah, interesting. You mentioned before the nasal strips that y'all have, and we got a couple here to try out. And when I use them, the first thing that happened, which you might say like, oh, why would I want to use a nasal strip if it does that? But actually, to me, it seems to be that it's actually showing effectiveness. So I've tried kind of the cheap Amazon ones before, and the cheap Amazon ones didn't do this, which was when I put the Airwaav nasal strip on, I actually started having a little bit of drip coming out of my nose, like, oh, something's really getting opened up. And then I've shared it with a couple of CrossFit buddies, and we all looked like goobers in the gym. But hey, I think we got PRs that day. But anyway,
Yeah.
so you mentioned nasal breathing, and I want to ask this question and then lead into practical application and use, and then we'll open it up to questions from the audience, which is that the nasal cavity has a lot to do with good breathing as well. And it's actually been shown that in some cases, excessive mouth breathing can lead to lower IQ as well as facial structure not getting developed well. I believe it was McEwen, what was his first name? The Oxygen Advantage author. Another good book for those listening, if you want to go and check out some more on like getting a deep dive into breathing. Patrick McEwen, that was the author. He's got a couple of YouTube videos as well. And he shows how facial feature follows how you breathe. To get back into Dr. Weston Price's stuff, there was an excerpt from one of his books about how he saw indigenous peoples, when their babies' mouths fell open, they would come and like assist and close the mouth to emphasize breathing through the nose. And part of the reason for that is that the mouth has a direct connection between the outside air and then your lungs. Whereas the nose has like this whole filtering process. It actually vortexes the air that goes through. It stimulates nitric oxide. And so emphasizing that particular passage through the airstrip or through the strip, airstrip would have been a cool name for that, by the way. Anyway, so when I've used the nasal strips, I've noticed it's even a cue for me, like the tactile feeling on my nose is a cue to continue to breathe through there. And so can you speak a little bit more to nasal breathing? And then I also know that there are a lot of folks who have some type of like a deviated septum or something like that where that becomes difficult. So can you shed a little bit of light on that?
Yeah, and all of our research has been done in the, when we do research, we are trying to do it in a way that's clinically repeatable on a controlled population. And obviously cadets have a very controlled life. So many of the outside factors are taken out of it. We haven't done any actual research with Airwaav to compare its benefits with nasal breathing versus mouth breathing. We're obviously big believers in all the research that you cited and the book Breathe and nasal breathing, and obviously the rise of mouth tape for really forcing people to breathe that way more at night is relevant. We created the nasal strips as a response. We haven't been prescriptive to say one way or the other, right? Like we're here to help however you're breathing. And we don't want to take as a brand to, we believe we have an amazing collection of science to stand on to validate the claims that we make. But we don't want to be people's doctors. And so when we get a lot of questions of, oh, I have, we'll have a point of view, but if it gets into dental questions or medical or health questions, we will always encourage people to consult your doctor. I think what I love, for people with the mouthpiece, when you wear it, there are some people who breathe right away and like can feel the oxygen difference. I think the fun thing about the nasal strips is when you put them on, whether you get a little drooling effect, so to speak, from your nose, or, you can literally see it open up your nasal passage, and it's an easier physiological change to diagnose than in your airway.
Mm.
And so, we've been encouraging anybody using them to obviously in conjunction, you're getting, and we do intend to do research that will correlate the relationship between what's the increase in percent improvement when you use the mouthpiece and the nasal strips, but we haven't, it takes a lot of time to organize that research. So we haven't done that just yet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, makes sense. Well, as you mentioned before, there does seem to be something to well, and we'll get into practical application here in just a moment, to the actual like biting down on the thing that stimulates something that a nasal strip doesn't necessarily do. And so talk to me a little bit about like, let's say I just joined the R&R program and there's this new gym I want to go to. I've kind of had some trouble breathing maybe in the past, maybe a little bit of sleep apnea, but I'm ready to like get on the path and get after it. And let's say I have all four of your products. So the four mouthpiece or the three mouthpieces and the strips. Talk to me about how I go about implementing those in my daily life.
Yeah, and the way that most athletes would use it at the end of, the day, I would say use whatever you're most comfortable with, right? They all have the same, they all have the same the same performance features. The PX1 product, again, it's a loose fitting product, fits on the lower teeth. It's easy to wear. It's easy to take off. If you're going to a CrossFit gym, a lot of CrossFitters, prefer this product because you can bite on it, do your reps, and then you pop it off, and you'll see a lot of photos with people with it hooked on their ear or in their bra strap, or, and they're socializing and talking, and they put it back in for the workout. The PX2 product, again, it's just, I think the most use would be the easy default is use the PX1 when you're lifting weights or working out. Use the PX2, which my PX2 is at home. Use the PX2 if you're running or cycling, and use the recovery product when you're sleeping.
Got it. And then maybe just have a nasal strip on all throughout.
Absolutely. And it's interesting. We get accountants who send us testimonials that they wear the mouthpiece in the office during tax season.
Oh,
If you have kids or any time in your life when you feel that tension in your shoulders or anxiety or stress, I would encourage you to just put the mouthpiece in and see what happens physiologically, because it can function like a pacifier for an adult, right? There is, comfort. There's studies that show your test scores will be better if you chew on a pencil or chew gum than if you don't. Like that, again, there's physiological things that are going on. We have baggage handlers who wear it all day. That's no different than working out, right? There's a lot of applications, and I would encourage people to use them anytime you have stress in your life, physical, psychological, or emotional, and at night, unless it creates some kind of a jaw pain or fatigue that's uncomfortable, and then consult your dentist or your doctor. And that's very rare. I will tell you, if you start wearing it, and you probably experience this, Marcus, your nose will drool. You may actually get dry mouth or drool more just from the mouthpiece. That sensation, or that will go away actually as your body acclimates to using it and wearing it. Yeah, and then, the best way to feel the result is to, when you first put it in, just start doing some things with and without it, whether that's stretching, whether that's lifting weights. And what tends to happen is we have one of our best selling t-shirts is one that says, I feel naked without it. That, what's cool about it is, and you talked about this, Marcus, like what's some little thing I can integrate into my workout or into my life that has significant impact. And the elite athletes like it, particularly like in a sport like baseball, where to improve parts of their performance, they typically have to change their swing or their throw, or you have to do something different. And the mouthpiece is simply, you just put it in. It's very little change with, what can be very, meaningful and differentiating results for people. And by the way, it's not the same for everybody. You started this by talking about anatomy and physiology. The jaw is one of the most unique parts of the human body. It's very different for everybody. It's, you know, if you're from Eastern Europe, you're going to have a very deep palate and a deep mouth. And if you're from Asia, your mouth is likely just by genetics going to be a little bit smaller. You know, and even sizing, you can have a 6'8", 300-pound lineman with a tiny little mouth and a 8-year-old with a mouth like Mick Jagger, right? Like it doesn't work the same for everybody.
Yeah. Well, cool. Really appreciate that. We're going to move into the question and answer or question and response portion. I do have one I want to read off to from someone who couldn't make it tonight. This individual is going through basically a certain type of therapy, and they are struggling with the body's stress response to some of the processing within that therapy. So what would you say to this person in regards to Airwaav?
I would encourage them to try to wear it in that situation and see if it has an impact. You know, there have been, you know, we've worked with members. There's one retired Sergeant Adam Mattis who, you know, was medically retired after suffering several IED blasts in Afghanistan. And he had ringing of his ears and he got stressed out in certain situations. And it was a little bit of like that pacifier for an adult concept that it actually reduced the ringing in his ears. He was more calm. He was able to deal with stressful situations in a unique way. You're not going to create any harm by wearing the mouthpiece, right? There's no deficit. It's not going to create a problem. And if it's uncomfortable, you can just take it back out. But I would encourage anyone, again, any stressful situation you're going into, you know, when there's this physiological change from clenching, and we know that sensation is accelerated when you have Airwaav in your mouth.
Very cool. So I want to open it up to those in the audience right now. You can either unmute yourself and go ahead and ask Bob a question, or if you want to write it into the chat thread, we can also get to it there.
I'll ask a question. Hi, Bob. Hi, Marcus. This is Kayvon. I'm one of the Mission 22 coaches. Apologize, I'm in public. That's why camera is off. I have a participant at Mission 22 who is struggling with quite a bit of anxiety, and he's a police officer right now. And so obviously after hearing this today, your conversation today, and I visited your website yesterday because he was like, yeah, I tried it. It wasn't comfortable. And so, you know, obviously to us coaches, that's not enough. You don't just give up on something so quickly. So I went to the website, I went to your FAQ, and I saw that, you know, you guys recommend that individuals wear it throughout the day, and, you know, just like shoes, right? They take some time to get used to it. Are there any additional resources, videos, anything like that we could bring to their attention? Obviously, here in the conversation today, it could help with his anxiety. He also has some sinus congestion that's, you know, been operated on. So it sounds like it may help with opening up drainage issues as well, right?
Yeah, and the mouthpiece, I don't know that it would have a correlation with, you know, the nasal issues. The nasal strips might help with that. And sorry, did he say the reason was it wasn't comfortable?
Yes, he said it wasn't, and I was referring to the nasal strips, by the way. Yes, for the sinuses. Yeah, he just said the mouthpiece was not comfortable, and so I said, well, let's take a look. You know, let's see what's going on. So, you know, that's where we found out in your FAQ about the fact that you should be wearing it while doing household chores, etc.
Yeah, and the first question would be, you know, we spend a lot of time trying to teach people how to fit it properly. If it doesn't fit well, it's not going to be comfortable. And so we have people who, you know, the people who like to just open a product and throw away the instructions, you know, did he mold it properly? Does it fit properly? Does he have the intake bar in the right place? And we're happy to jump on a call with him and do a Zoom to help him talk through. We have video resources. You know, the fact that they didn't you know, when you buy the product from our site, we send you a ton of resources about how to make sure you get the proper fit. We should get him those videos. We're happy to jump on a Zoom and walk him through it. We actually have a lot of police officers and first responders who use the product with a lot of great testimonials. And it would also be, if it's the recovery product, you know, we might start and say, hey, let's have him try the PX1 because it is a more relaxed fit. It's kind of the entry product, the easiest to fit and get used to, actually.
Okay, got it.
But
Sounds-
I would really, and I'd love to hear the response. Let's get him comfortable with the product. And we actually talk about it like if you've ever had the glasses that are like the built-in bifocals where they're like, only wear them 2 hours at a time because your brain is changing how it's responding in your body. So if like for a police officer or just somebody lifting weights, we're not as prescriptive, but for like a pitcher, we actually tell them to do that. Like, hey, wear it walking around, wear it running, wear it during your training. Don't do your baseball pitching with it for at least 2 weeks because your body's gonna function different with it in your mouth.
Okay, sounds good. And then there's a phone number that he could reach out, or he fills out a form online and
He can have him reach out to me, or we'll follow up with this, and Marcus can get you my email, or someone on our team will for sure.
Perfect.
Any of the people in the program using it, like this is a partnership. We're here to be resources to Mission 22 and help.
Perfect. Thank you. And then one more question. So as coaches, and I think there's 10 of us currently, we all feel that it's helpful for us to either have the product like Mission 22 gave us access to Neocom. And obviously I know there's budget and restrictions and all that. Is there any type of a product discount code you could give us so that those of us that are obviously we're teaching this or we're encouraging our participants to use these could purchase these on our own, maybe at a discounted price?
Absolutely. And we can create a separate code for Mission 22 coaches and employees.
Okay,
Marcus and I can go back and forth on that after this to share that out with the coaches.
Awesome. Thank you. Because I think we can also promote it to others, non-Mission 22 clients. All right. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Kayvon, I think you came in slightly late, which all good. Glad to have you here. We do have one currently. I'm going to post it to the workplace group. You can take advantage of that. They're giving us a pretty solid discount. So yes, that will be available.
Thank you.
And you mentioned molding. I made the mistake, I think, of and Kayvon, I think this might have to have something to do with the guy you're working with, which is that after I followed the instructions initially on my PX2, since it did have a slightly tighter fit, it kept sort of popping off of my teeth after I thought I followed the instructions. And so I figured like, well, maybe it didn't fit quite right. I'm going to redo the process and put it back in hot water and do the thing. Don't do that. That ends up making it worse. But what I found with the PX1 is that after sort of like breaking it in, after having done the process of the hot water, the instructions are in, they're there in the product. Then it started to make more sense of like, oh, that's how it's supposed to fit.
Yeah, and it also, we actually recommend the microwave approach, wrapping it up in a wet paper towel. And, even seeing how it's supposed to fit on the lower teeth, where that, that bar should be right behind your lower teeth. And, boiling water is a little harder on the material. It softens it up a lot faster than the microwave. So the material actually can be remolded over and over again. And if it gets really hot, like once it sticks together, as Marcus said, it'll deteriorate. But we have a product warranty. Like if it gets messed up, it's a no questions asked, we'll send anybody a new one. But even like I've had, when I fit my recovery product, I got a great fit on one side and it wasn't on the other. And in that case, I just dipped one side into boiling water for a little bit, warm it up. Really, when you're molding it, really squeeze that material into your teeth. Because that, when it's formed, you want it to really look like your teeth. And that, the material will also, the clear material will shrink it's a patented material. It'll shrink 24 hours after you form it. So our advice would be to, after you form it, keep it in your mouth for 5 minutes. Keep sucking on it and do as much as you can to kind of get it in the right position. And then wait overnight and see how it feels the next day. And again, there's really comprehensive videos with lots of fitting tips and tricks that are on our YouTube channel. And again, because there's a link to it on the fitting instructions that I think are in the bag, but that getting it properly is really important.
Awesome. Anybody else?
Yeah, correct me if we've already gone over this, but I'm curious about the results for those that might have. Do you folks have a lot of test results coming from MMA type of backgrounds, those with deviated septums, and how the performance affects those with a deviated septum?
You know, it would be purely anecdotal. So we have a ton of jujitsu people that reach out and use Airwave.
Mhm.
Um, I don't, you know, we have, you know, most of the MAA out. I mean, we do also sell athletic mouth guards under some different brands, protective mouth guards. I'm not aware of any just offhand anecdote on the deviated septum piece, but
Gotcha. Yeah, because I have a broken nose, and I'm just curious if there's any sort of findings or data analytics to kind of
yeah,
cross-reference against individuals that do have that type of situation that they're dealing with in terms of breathing issues
yeah.
overall.
I broke my nose too, and it's same thing. It's hard to overcome.
It is extremely.
Awesome. Well, anybody else? Let's see. We've got, yeah, so one other question, is the device available to our veterans through VA or via medical insurance? Is this a medical device?
So we would love it to be available through the VA. It is HSA approved for like a health savings account, which is basically, you know, 30% off if you think of the taxes you'd ordinarily pay on that. So if you can help us get it into the VA, we would love nothing more than to provide it through that channel.
Also, if you go to the website now, you'll see lots of new colors are coming out, and all of us like nice colored products. It's funny the little things that will help with like use and compliance that we don't necessarily give credit to. But in any case, yeah, between the discount code that we have for you today and the kind of enduring partnership, hopefully that removes the barrier if for somebody's financial situation or healthcare situation, they're not able to afford it at retail at the moment.
Yeah. And again, I created the code more for just like you know, a broader audience. We'll make sure Mission 22 employees are set up with a code that's not kind of public and in the wild, but that, you know, everyone can use through the site.
Thank you so much. I did have one last question for me. So a lot of participants are on, have sleep apnea or struggling with their sleep apnea machines. And I apologize if this was already covered when I hadn't been here yet. But I would think that something like this, because I personally, for example, I don't have sleep apnea, but after I passed 40, I started having issues with snoring, which I guess that happens with the changes in the structure of the neck and shoulder, whatever the area. So I wear a mouth guard, which has helped greatly, or sometimes I tape my mouth. I would think that this device could potentially help with sleep apnea, as well as because this one participant also has real serious issues with his pulse ox, so his oxygen levels dip down quite a bit, and so he's getting checked out and all that. But this should help as well, correct?
Yes. So part of the, we have so we don't make any claims about apnea or snoring with the recovery product. We do sell FDA regulated snoring products. I will say this product shares some of the technology as that product. And if you were to look at the testimonials about Airwave recovery, lots of people are buying it and talking about how it helps with their snoring. There's some sleep doctors, actually, there's videos on YouTube where they're like, mouth tape and Airwave recovery are the all natural cure for apnea. We do not make any claims like that, but we love it when we see people who are using it and are getting that. Again, if it benefits their life in any way, we are feeling we're doing our job. So there's a lot of testimonials to that regard, but I will tell you, for snoring in particular, most oral appliances have a 25% efficacy rate. So the top selling snoring mouthpiece has like a 3-star rating on Amazon, right? And that's just, again, the anatomy of the jaw. And this is where Marcus started this, right? Our anatomy, the jaw, it's so unique and different. It's really hard to, get a device that works, and many of those snoring devices are really forcing your jaw forward and manipulating your jaw or your tongue. We're just trying to use the tongue's natural reflex to, things in the mouth, either being touched on the sides or that kind of popcorn kernel effect to improve breathing. So again, if the tongue's out of your back of your throat, you probably won't snore as much, and it could help, but that's not, I'll say it again, we do not make any claim that it helps with that.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Can you swim with it? I saw there was a triathlon section on the site.
Yeah, you can. You'd want to use the PX2.
Okay.
Obviously you're opening your mouth to breathe. And so if if it were me, I would use the PX2. So.
Okay. Check.
And it probably takes a little more getting used to.
Great. Well, we want to thank you so much for your time. And again, if y'all have any specific questions you want to ask to us or to Bob, we can pass that along. And we're really looking forward to seeing what this partnership is going to develop into. And we're stoked to have you all on board.
Thanks, everybody. Feel free to reach out to us with any specific questions, or if you have clients that you're working with that need extra help, we are here to be supportive and help however we can.